One of the most common questions that I get is, can an RN own or open a med spa? And so the answer depends on the state. Texas is a really good example of understanding the difference between what the law says and how it is applied to like real life situations and what actually matters. So stick with me because this is usually less dramatic than the internet makes it. I work in med spas all across Texas, and structure typically doesn't come up. Ownership questions don't usually, surface randomly. It tends to surface when something's triggered, like a patient complaint, an investigation, an insurance issue, a partnership dispute, something of that nature. And so those are when those things tend to arise. It's not like somebody's going in and checking on those things. There's not an officer of compliance, structure of your business that comes in and knocks on your door and says, hey, I need to see if your business is structured correctly. It's, more of when problems arise. So the conversation isn't necessarily about whether an RN is capable, because we know they absolutely are. It's more about business structure and the legal control, which is a different question than clinical skills, injector training, or experience. So across the US, med spas are categorized as medical clinics because they offer treatments like Botox and fillers. Ownership rules don't come from cosmetology boards. They come from medical practice laws, rules, and state-specific laws. In Texas, med spas are considered medical practices, and so they fall under the Corporate Practice of Medicine laws, also known as CPOM. So if you ever hear that abbreviation, CPOM, CPOM, Corporate Practice of Medicine, all the same thing. What that generally means is that the medical practice itself must be physician-owned or controlled by the physician. Physicians retain control over medical decision-making. RNs may perform certain clinical services under delegation and supervision, but delegation is separate from ownership and control of the medical practice portion of your clinic. This is where people get confused. Many RN-run clinics operate in Texas without any problem for years. There is no routine ownership policing. So nobody's, again, policing and coming and knocking at your door, the structure of your business. So if something goes wrong, again, a complaint, an adverse event, that's when things start to kind of fall apart and can come to light. So the real risk isn't usually about daily operations. The risk is discovering that later on that the structure doesn't hold up once questions are asked. The bottom line is this. So Texas laws separate clinical participation from legal ownership and control of the medical practice. Most clinics don't run into problems, again, but when they do, structure suddenly matters a lot more than people expect. And this is where most people realize they were asking the wrong question. If you're an RN in Texas, this doesn't automatically mean that you're doing something wrong. It just means you should understand how your clinic is structured and where you fall on the risk spectrum. If you want to know whether your setup is low risk, moderate risk, or needs adjustment, that's exactly what we help clinics evaluate. If one thing that I see most often incorrectly set up with clinics, it's going to be the CPOM structure. So if you're in a CPOM state, then you have to follow that corporate medicine structure. Basically, that law is just stating that if you are not a physician, you cannot own a medical clinic or cannot own more than the physicians. But there's ways that the money flows in and out of the clinic and the ways that it's legally structured and set up. So the CPOM structure requires an MSO. If you're going to be an RN, an NP, a PA that owns a clinic, you need to make sure you're set up with an MSO, which is a management service operation agreement. So again, that's just, basically saying you're set up in a legal way that you can operate a medical clinic.